So moving on to the next topic here, we're going to talk about Steven Crowder. So Steven Crowder is very entertaining. His YouTube channel, I've been watching his YouTube channel for a while now. He is hilarious. Well, he decided that since there was so much controversy about whether or not there was voter fraud and how widespread the voter fraud was and such during the 2020 election, he decided that he was going to do some research. I don't know why a comedian is doing more investigative journalism than the Washington Post, the New York Times, CNN. None of them seem interested in this. But you have a comedian with a show that talks politics somehow doing better journalism than mainstream media outlets. So what Steven Crowder did was he noticed, especially in two states. He's from Michigan, so he went to Michigan, and then the state that had online voter rolls where you could see, who voted. You can see where they registered, their address, and how they voted. Not how they voted, but that they voted. He went and said he got all that information, and then he plugged all of it in to the UPS tracker. Basically, it tells you whether or not a package can be delivered to the address. And then he sorted out all of the addresses where the UPS, I don't know if he's using actual UPS, but the UPS database would say, no, we can't deliver there. That's not a legit address. So he used that. Then he took all of those and he sent people to these addresses just to take a picture of those locations. And for further proof, he used that day's newspaper as proof that, okay, as of this date, this is what the address looks like. So he went through and did all of that to prove that, okay, there are addresses where people were voting and there was no address. Somehow they got a ballot and somehow they voted without an address, without a legit address. He had documentation of how one address was actually in the middle of the intersection. So there's no house, there's no residence in that intersection. There were empty lots. So like there was an apartment put down, like, oh, apartment 409 or something like that, 408, whatever it was. And there was no apartment complex at all. It was just an empty lot. The worst one was, and this is I believe it was in Nevada, so it was probably somewhere in Vegas, where the address was actually a freeway on-ramp. So you can see it. It's like, this is where people go to get onto the freeway. That's where the address is. And the person that went there, he said, this was really difficult because I had to stand in the middle of the street to get the picture of where the address was. And, there's cars trying to get onto the freeway from here. And I had to actually walk over there because there was no public parking. It was all private parking. So I couldn't park. And then the nearest place was a government building about about a quarter mile away. There was a whole sorts of problems with trying to get that image. But yeah, it's a freeway on-ramp or a freeway overpass or something like that. So he's proving all of this. So that's happening in Nevada. Then he has somebody else in Michigan go places. There was one place where the address was a community center. There was another address where it was actually an alley. So say you had the address, the number on the street was 1407, and then you had 1403. Well, the address that was listed was 1405, and 1405 is actually an alley that goes in between those two houses. So it's like you're in a residential area and there's no house. So that number's wrong. So you're talking about this in two states that had some shadiness going on. And he didn't say that the fraud he uncovered, he said it was voter fraud. So there are specific instances of voter fraud. We all know that happens every election. I don't want to say it's unavoidable because I'd like to think we can get rid of it almost completely, but it's going to happen. there's going to be some voter fraud. There's going to be some issues with every election, especially there's 51 different elections going on during a presidential cycle. So it is kind of rough. But he didn't say that it affected the outcome of the election either. He said, we have evidence of voter fraud. There's a lot of evidence that it happened with quite a few people. He didn't say anything else. He said, here's the proof. And he brought receipts. He brought video. He showed that it was on a specific date of recently. He had all the evidence he needed. And so he made sure, obviously, he's still running a business. He posted it on Twitter, said, hey, I have evidence of voter fraud. And Twitter suspended him. So Twitter suspended his account for 12 hours. And it's pretty sickening, because if Twitter can suspend your account, if any social media platform can suspend your account or suspend your access to your account because you are actually bringing actual evidence, you're doing investigative journalism, I don't understand why any media outlet isn't covering this in just huge detail. This screws them over. If they ever start doing legit media, legit investigative journalism again, this screws them over completely. They will not be able to post this kind of stuff because Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, whoever can just completely wipe out their page right away. So there's no incentive now. This is basically Twitter saying, oh, if you do legit investigative journalism, we'll just ban you. So I'm a little bit shocked that this happened, because what are we allowed to post on social media anymore? If you're a serious journalist, if maybe you're thinking about getting into journalism. One of the people I follow the most is Tim Pool. Tim Pool made a career because what he did is, instead of going to college for journalism, he bought a bunch of camera equipment and bought a bunch of plane tickets, and wherever there was a story, he just went there and covered it. You know, he would take his camera and just start recording everything. So he went to Malmo in Sweden when there was stories of rape gangs out there. So he went out there and tried to get some information. He was at Occupy Wall Street. He was at, I believe there was, I want to remember, I'm trying to think where else he was that he talked about. But those are the two things that stand out. They're big deals. And that's how he made his name, is he went out and just started getting into things. Someone like that, if you're someone like that who's thinking, oh, I'll just follow that same model, I'll go be in investigative journalism, I'll take that 50, 60, 70 grand I was going to spend on a 4-year journalism degree, and I'll just travel the world, and I'll go to the places that are hotspots, and we'll see what it looks like. If that's what your plan is, Twitter, Facebook, these social media outlets who are acting as publishers now, they're not acting as platforms, they can just take you down. So that should scare the hell out of all the big mainstream media outlets, places like Fox News, places like CNN, places like NBC, ABC, all the big networks. It should scare them. But Steven Crowder isn't somebody they like. He doesn't fit into their narrative. So it's fine, because he's technically a competitor with them. So it's okay if it happens to my competitor. But what you don't realize is that when you are trampling on freedom of speech, freedom of the press for one place, for one person, it doesn't take a lot until it comes after you too. So that's really scary that happened. But he came back, and I think Twitter lifted the ban really quick after his lawyer called Twitter. And I'm gonna post links in the video below, so you'll be able to follow Steven Crowder's whole spiel on it, because it's about an hour long. He went through and said, here's an address, it doesn't exist, somebody voted from here. And the biggest shock that you'll see, he actually found out that one of the illegal votes was from a former Hillary Clinton campaign staffer. And that lady might have been Clinton, shall we say. So no one knows where she really is. She has a couple of the fake address she had in Nevada. She also has a fake address in London. There's a lot of, it's really creepy, actually, now that you think about it, when you really think about it. So that's really, but going back, Steven Crowder being removed from Twitter for posting true information about the election. That's wrong. And I'm glad he's back on Twitter. He didn't, the videos, I definitely recommend watch Steven Crowder's videos, from yesterday and today. I'll post them in the, I'll post the links to those YouTube videos, below. Just take a look at those. They're definitely worth your time, and they're funny. He's funny guy. So at the very least, you'll be entertained, and you'll be able to see, look, there are a lot of problems with our electoral system in a lot of these states, and they do need to be cleaned up, because I don't think there's anything that will erode trust in our elections faster than a comedian being able to prove that potentially at least hundreds, maybe thousands of votes were cast illegally in one state. And even if it doesn't affect the outcome of an election, it shouldn't be that close. If there's, you can go back to the year 2000. George W. Bush won Florida by just over 500 votes. There are, you have to think of every election could be that close. And if a comedian can go and prove in 1 hour that 20 votes were illegal, that's a big deal. There's probably more in a bigger state like Florida. Now, he was in Nevada, which is a smaller state as far as population, and he stuck mostly to the Vegas area. So, there are places in Nevada where, what if there's more? So now one state's not going to throw this whole election. Remember, Trump would have needed to flip 3 of the states that he had, that he lost. So it wouldn't have affected this election, but taking someone down for posting true information and doing legit journalism, they did that to James O'Keefe last week or the week before. Now they did it to Steven Crowder. It's pretty shady. And I've been very hesitant to call for any kind of regulations on these big tech platforms. But the reality is, if they are going to act as publishers and not as platforms, as in they're going to act as the New York Times rather than as Verizon Mobile, as your mobile carrier, then they need to be treated as such. So they need to have some sort of regulation. So I'm leaning more towards that. I'm getting more and more into, at the very least, we need to take a look at Section 230 and make sure it's a bit more concrete on this is what you can moderate. You can moderate things that we've all tend to agree is indecent. Incitement to actual incitement to violence, actual doxing, actual violence, pornography, things like that. So these are things that we need to take a look at, but it is scary that a big tech platform was able to deplatform somebody, even for a short amount of time, when they posted evidence of a problem that we have in our society.